Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, citizens of Tampa. Tampa City Council now to come to order for special call meeting for October 18, 2021. We'll start with a moment of silence, but I also want to let folks know they don't know the passing of General Colin Powell this morning. Great servant, public servant to the United States of America and the armed forces. Great loss to this nation and a great world leader. So we'll bow our heads for a moment of silence, and then we'll go with the Pledge of Allegiance. Amen. Let's pledge allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Chair, roll call.
Carlson.
Here.
Maniscalco.
Here.
Dingfelder.
Here.
Citro.
Here.
Vieira. Miranda. And Goods.
Here.
We have a physical quorum.
Please note, Mr. Miranda has a special meeting. He has a memorandum from that, and Mr. Vieira will be in about 5 to 7 minutes. Ms. Shelby.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of Tampa City Council. Martin Shelby, City Council Attorney. Today is the 18th of October. It is past 10 a.m., and we're here for a special call workshop. It's being conducted with a live in-person quorum of the Tampa City Council present in City Council's chambers. However, in light of the continuing COVID-19 government-issued health standards or guidance now in effect, members of the public have the opportunity to participate virtually through what is referred to by Florida statutes and rules as Communication Media Technology, or CMT. Today's special call workshop is being held for the purpose of discussing whether to add additional meetings of City Council and to discuss any changes to City Council's scheduling and agendas. The public and the citizens of Tampa are able to watch, listen, and view this meeting on Spectrum Channel 640, Frontier Channel 15, and live stream at tampa.gov/livestream, one word. Now, the public has had opportunities to participate by alternate means besides communication media technology, by using written comments sent in through the internet or web, by email, by U.S. mail. And for those people who wanted to speak remotely during public comment with the use of audio CMT, they may have done so by pre-registering, and the way to do that, the instructions are on the City Council's webpage at tampagov.net/City Council, one word. And that requires pre-registration. Now, for those who don't have CMT or did not pre-register, you do have the ability to come to City Hall to use technology that's being made available to the public by the City of Tampa here at Old City Hall on the second floor, one floor below, at 315 East Kennedy Boulevard. And please note that the use of masks and social distancing inside the building are encouraged. And again, if you're using the GoToMeeting platform, please know that the chat box is not to be used except for technical problems. Please do not use the chat box to communicate with members of City Council. That concludes my opening remarks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you,
Oh,
sir.
one last
Motion to
thing.
approve.
Obviously, this being CMT, consistent with what we've done in the past, a motion to adopt the rules consistent with the notice and the rules I've stated.
Motion to adopt.
So moved.
Mr. Citro has moved it. Mrs. Maniscalco, second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried.
Thank you.
Madam Deputy Clerk, public comment. How many speakers you have registered this morning?
I have 3 registered speakers.
All right. We have anyone on the second floor to speak on this morning special call?
We have no speakers today.
No speakers. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
All right, Madam Deputy Clerk, let's go to the registered calls, please.
Good morning, Chair. The first caller is going to be, the first speaker is going to be Stephanie Pointer. Stephanie, if you're on the line, please unmute yourself, and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. Can you hear me?
Good morning.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank Sue Ling for scheduling me to speak before the sun came up this morning. She and Michelle are absolutely amazing, and you are lucky to have them. In 2000, Tampa had 300,000 residents. The last numbers show we're hovering at 400,000. Yet, the Tampa City Council is still following the same schedule. That must change. I'm of the mind that y'all also need a raise. I know you'll shake your heads no at the suggestion, but at no time should someone be devoting themselves to the city and this position alone while qualifying for affordable housing. Reality is that with only the Tampa City Council salary, a family of 3 would fall below the 80% of Tampa's AMI. No one runs for Tampa City Council for the money. Lord, we all know there are easier ways to get paid. It is about doing what you think is best for the city you love. Tampa City Council is doing an amazing job making things happen for the neighborhoods. We, the neighborhood associations, at least the ones I have spoken with, are very happy with the results we are seeing from this council. Although I am guessing after last week, the representatives of the development community aren't as happy. The neighborhoods have been at a disadvantage for years. We get less time to defend our positions in 2-day meetings. We don't know what the developers will say until they show up and say it. We've been ignored over and over again. When we show up in force, the developers ask for a continuance without a voice heard from the neighbors who made the times in their lives to show up for free. Because of the Tampa City Council, we now have good folks in the development community who are starting to see that neighborhoods are not unreasonable, that they are seeing that we can work with them, and sometimes we can even work for them. We are the experts in our neighborhoods, and we appreciate your support. Neighborhood associations are not land use or legal experts. We don't want to be, but we do want to be informed. Staff is starting to listen. They are making attempts to educate us through different venues, phone calls, education programs, listening sessions, neighborhood inclusion. They're increasing from staff, and we love it. We are seeing these changes because of the words and the action of this city council. You gentlemen represent the people of Tampa. We, the neighborhoods, are noticing. The developers and their representatives are noticing. Don't let folks who don't play by the rules bully you into being something less of a voice for the people. The people elected you because they think you will do what is best for them. I believe that they're correct in that assumption. I urge all city councilmen to recuse themselves, along with Councilman Dave Felder. You could be next. Remember that your
Thank you, Ms.
neighborhoods
Porter.
are
Thank you. Thank you for your
stronger
comments.
because we stand together. So should you. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next caller, speaker is going to be Carol Ann Bennett. Ms. Bennett, if you're on the line, please unmute yourself and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, my name is Carol Ann Bennett. Stephanie's a hard act to follow. Just y'all pretend like I'm saying everything Stephanie just said. In addition, I am concerned about the way continuances are done. I think that has a contributing effect to the problems with meeting times. I would like to suggest that if applicant wants a continuance, they must request it within 72 hours before the meeting. That would make it more or less an automatic granting of that request, but most importantly, that gives the neighborhoods time to plan or undo the plans they've made to speak. If they don't ask for a continuance at least 72 hours in advance, then they must present. The CMT is a big improvement, but you can't use cell phones, and not everybody has a laptop or a home computer. So if they want to speak virtually, they have to make other arrangements. Sometimes it's during the day. I've seen people on CMT and they're obviously putting their job on hold while they try to frantically speak while they're at work. People who work at nights, even if they're going to speak CMT, they're going to need a babysitter. And a lot of people feel like if they show up in person that their voice is going to have more weight. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people standing out there waiting to speak only to have it continued. And so I think this is a reasonable solution to that. I also think that it's important not to reduce public comment as a way of shortening the meetings. The last thing we need is less citizen involvement. That's not in the best interest of the city. I also think that applicants, particularly a larger project for rezonings, should require a public information meeting, is well advertised and has a sign-up sheet. I've seen repeatedly applicants stand up and say, oh, I talked to the neighbors. And then neighbor after neighbor will get up and say, well, he didn't talk to me. I don't know who he's talking about. And then sometimes you'll pressure them on and say, well, who did you talk to? And they'll come up like, well, one person. So I think that that's, you know, a really valuable thing that will help reduce time, because I've seen continuance ask for so they can meet with the public. Everyone knows how much the city's grown. That means the workload for every city job has grown right along with it, and that includes you guys. And the meetings and the pay need to keep up with the growth. I have a lot of respect for you, all of you. I'm very impressed by you. I'd rather stick hot pokers in my eyes than do your job. I think you really try very hard to do what's best for the city. I don't always agree with you, but I respect you, and I hope you do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is going to be Jean Strawmeyer. Jean, if you're on the line, please unmute yourself and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. My name is Jean Strohmeyer. I have been a lifelong resident of the city of Tampa down here, SOG. This is my 30th year. The issue y'all are having is whether you have additional meetings and such like that. I think you guys would be the best judge of your time. So, but the city has grown, as Stephanie has said, and Carol Ann. So that's, you know, something that y'all need to decide for yourselves. In saying that, often the CMT should definitely be kept, because this has been a lifeline for me to be able to not only work in my own neighborhood, but to also work in my business and participate with city council. So I appreciate that going on, and I hope it stays. Continuances, yes, the continuances have gotten a little ridiculous. We've listened to y'all talk about that. So I like what Carol Ann said about perhaps 72-hour notice if you're going to try a continuance. We know things happen, so it can't be set in stone because things happen. But I propose that for the neighbors who have come to speak and registered, they should be able to speak and then perhaps play their recording at the actual meeting if it's continued. Give them the option if they want to speak now and have it recorded, or come back. I think they should have an option. That's just one way around that. And then lastly, the big elephant is, you know, you guys are elected by us, by our, you know, your neighbors, your districts, and you have your citywides. We have been coming before you for 2 years consistently to bolster our own neighborhoods. I appreciate y'all that do listen to us and vote that way. I have respect for those that may not want to vote a particular way, but they'll say, look, I don't believe this is the right thing, but this is what my voting base, this is what my constituents want, so I'm going to vote that way. I've heard that said on council floor. I don't think it's very cool for one individual to start suing our city council. That is disturbing me to the nth degree. I see other city council sitting to lunch with these people that have sued other people, and you know, these lawsuits and these, you know, an anonymous source said this, somebody said that. I cannot stand that, and it's dirty, and I don't like it. I felt like I had to take a bath after that. It was just bad, and you know, we're going to be backing y'all. We are paying attention, and we will be doing our own investigations. So thank you. We love you. Bye.
Thank you. We have anyone else, Madam Clerk?
Chair, that's going to conclude the registered speakers that I have.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll go to item number 1, the workshop, but I'm going to let Chief Bennett come up first in reference to the CMT situation. He has some concerns, suggestions, so I want to hear him out first before we get into the workshop. Chief Bennett.
Morning, Chairman. Good morning, Council. John Bennett, Chief of Staff.
Morning.
Good morning, public. Appreciate public comments. I think they're obviously timely and welcome as always. I'm pretty sure that my understanding of the last time we talked about CMT, communications media technology, that good, better, thank you. Figured it would be on when I came up here. Just for the sake of repeating, John Bennett, Chief of Staff.
Nobody stood at the podium for the last 2 years, John.
Yeah,
so
there you go. Yeah, I had to get the cobweb off. Anyway, when we talked about CMT last time, Communications Media Technology, we agreed that the current state of COVID, I talk to the experts all the time, the Department of Health, USF Health, that safety is our most paramount issue, of course, and serving the public in balancing those two things. And we agreed that we would look towards the end of this calendar year, beginning of next calendar year, to make any logistical or other adjustments. So I have polled our staff. I have no feedback from the four major stakeholders, which is Technology and Information, Communications Department, the Clerk's Office, and the Legal Department, that we should make any logistical changes between now and then. Obviously, we're always open to council and the public's feedback to make adaptations. So if it's just a matter of increasing quantity, staff is ready and able to handle that. If it's about changing the logistics of how a meeting goes, based on everything we know, we are able to manage current state. And everything we do that changes creates unintended consequences between now and the end of the year. So, while we would be able to adapt, I think keeping things as they are is probably recommended between the logistics of the building, handing people in and out of the second floor, managing the CMT is working well. It has a rhythm. It's not ideal, but if you start changing things now, it's going to create another dynamic with the CMT agreement that we made between now and the end of the year. So I'm just putting that out there. I'm open to questions and ideas.
Chief, I hear from the technology folks and Mr. Shelby about we don't have a certain technology for the CMT, so I don't really know what that is or what that will cost us, and this council needs to look at that to move forward in the future with the CMT for the public, because that is a concern for the public wanting to have that. It has been valuable for a lot of folks who can't get down here, transportation, whatever it means. So I'm just curious about that aspect.
Now, are we talking just voice, or are we talking more of a media platform, visual?
I'll let Mr. Shelby answer that because he's come to you a couple times on that in reference to the IT department.
I believe, good morning. Martin Shelby, City Council Attorney. In speaking with CTTV with regard to the technology that's needed for the switching, for instance, the use of PowerPoint presentations to be controlled in the control room as opposed to out here, or as opposed to somebody sharing their screen. My understanding was that if this were to be, if it's council's pleasure, to continue with CTTV permanently, that the technology does need to be upgraded to be able to handle the capacity. And I guess that's a discussion between the administration and the staff of CTTV.
Chief, can you respond to that? Then I'll take questions from council members.
Yeah, no, if there's a gap between the way we're doing this hybrid now and what we want to do long-term, we definitely can close that gap. So I'll talk to Russell Halpert, our director over TNI and communications, and Adam to see what we need to do. But of course, there's the functionality, and then there's the record-keeping aspect, and making sure that we're safe and secure with the media that's being presented. So, I'll look at all three of those elements and make sure that we can support it going forward.
Ms. Vieira, you recognized.
And are we doing questions at this time, or just questions, comments, general thoughts?
To this situation here, if you have any questions in reference to this.
I have no questions. I mean, I don't have any questions.
Mr. Maniscalco. Mr. Carlson.
Yeah, first I just wanted to say thank you to all the producers and video people who have put all this together. I mean, it's like putting on a big live TV show, and the way they're able to coordinate. Every now and then there's bugs, but going from what we had before to this, and as seamlessly it has done, I just want to thank all of them for the hard work. I feel strongly that and I've said this before, but I feel strongly that we should be consistent in requiring video for all public comment if we have remote access. And we only do that for quasi-judicial issues. But I think that the purpose of public comment is for people to come before the public, and just doing it audio doesn't work. One of the complications with that is as I understand, with GoToMeeting, it doesn't work. The video doesn't work on some platforms. We've had some issues with the quasi-judicial part. I think in the announcements of the CMT, we ought to be maybe more explicit and and more clear that for, even if we just do it for quasi-judicial, that you have to use either the GoToMeeting app or some other format so that people can see on video, so that people don't accidentally come up and not understand it. But if we work through that challenge, I think people who want to give public comment deserve to be on video, and I think they should be on video because it puts them in front of us. The other thing that I've heard a lot of complaints about is public comment from the second floor, and I don't know what our rule is about coming back to this floor. This is the first time that staff have really presented in front of us in a couple years, other than a couple exceptions. But the public feels disconnected from us. They feel that it's the same being at home as it is being on the second floor. And maybe you could speak to when we might be able to get the public back in this room. And even if they're staged downstairs and come up and speak, I think they're okay with that, but they just would like to speak in front of us instead of downstairs.
Chief?
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Carlson. And again, staff can support anything that council wants to put in place. I would say that it's going to require additional staff to do the in and out of second, third floor. Let me just give you the last data that I looked at related to our COVID policies and keeping everybody safe. The state is running about a 4% positivity rate. The county's running about a 6% positivity rate. When I talked to USF Health, their recommendation was 3% or below would get us into a state of normalcy. We don't have a timeline with that like any other modeling. It's very difficult. It was very difficult for them to predict the Delta variant. We're moving into flu season, so we have that compoundment. But we also go outside and we see everybody, in the stadiums full and everything else. So it's a very interesting decision to make for council, whether you want to, have a capacity assessment for this floor and then kind of an in and out strategy, based on social distance, physical distancing. So we can support anything between now and the end of the year as it relates to the CMT. And I did pick up your comments about having the video enabled technology for the public. And the only thing we have to remember on that is whatever platform we select, a lot of it is reliant on the individual's platform at their home or their office or the library or whatever. So we may be able to set up well on our end, but we have to make sure that they can interface on their end. And most folks have that capability, but not everybody. So I would recommend that if you can get video, great, but if you can't, we at least have the voice for those communities that can at least get on by voice. And I think maybe that's what you were saying, is make sure that we have the ability to do it.
Yeah, and also for, more proactively communicating that people with certain devices, it's not, I think, mostly people who don't have devices, that they have an iPad maybe that's not compatible if they're streaming through a website instead of the app. And so just explaining to people clearly in advance what they need to do so they can get the hookup on their side. But when do you, based on all that you just said, when do you think we could or should have people either in the room or people coming from the second floor up here? Because you were already staffing downstairs, right? And so could we, since we're already staffing downstairs, could we have people stationed down there and then come up a few at a time? Or
well, again, my prediction, it would elongate your meeting to have the transfer around unless there's a certain capacity limitation to this floor and we let groups in and out based on queuing up the agenda. But that's going to take some choreographing, whereas of now you're just switching out at the microphone down there and everybody who's going to speak is on that floor. And, so.
But Chief, I think the problem you have, when I look at what the public is asking right now for this council to do, it's different from the Variance Review Board and some of these other boards who have kind of let some folks in. Council operates totally different, and that means that more people, we're talking a different dynamic. So I just want council members to kind of understand, we want to, do what the public's asking, but still we are in this kind of state of emergency a little bit, and plus looking at the dynamics that we have to change versus a Variance Review Board meeting versus an actual city council meeting. So just keep that in mind, Jim, but whatever council's pleasure it is, but just want to throw that out. I'll get to Mr. Dinford, but let you get with, Mr. Carlson, you finished, sir?
no, could I just say to that point though, if somebody, before we had CMT, for public comment, people would come here in person. Right. And so their face and their voice are on video. And so if we're simulating that electronically, then we would make video available to everyone. And maybe we'd make exceptions if it's not quasi-judicial, but we would make video available to everybody, because then, the whole idea is if somebody wants to contact us, they can email us or call us. But the purpose of coming before us is so they're not only speaking to us, but speaking to the broader community. And I think they deserve to have the option to be on video as well. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Shelby?
If I can, just so that the council and the public are aware that since the beginning, when we realized that using the GoToMeeting platform did have limitations with regard to the devices that you can use, in the rules and the instructions, it does state, and I'll read it so the public does hear it, in order to participate via CMT, you must have access to a communications media device such as a tablet or a computer equipped with a camera and microphone that will enable you to be seen, video, and heard audio by the City Council and all other participants. And this is actually in bold and in red. It says, for these specific two-way video virtual meeting formats, cell phones and smartphones are not compatible, as they will not allow you to share your camera when connected. Now, the advantage to the GoToMeeting platform is that that's what we've been using. The staff is able to do it. It has been able to accommodate. The security is also a concern, I know, to the administration. So with that platform, certain devices are needed for video. With regard to what the chief said, having the audio capability for general public comment allows people who don't have that access and don't have the ability to have that set up pre-registered. It's a lot easier to phone in, as the clerk would say, to be able to get them in. So for general public comment, there isn't the due process requirement that for quasi-judicial, it is necessary for people to be seen if the suggestion should come up for cross-examination and the like. It complicates things for quasi-judicial, but from a legal standpoint, it becomes more necessary to have the video. So it's still council's pleasure, but I believe the chair alluded to the chief alluded to the fact that requiring video for general public comment may preclude certain people from being able to share their comments. Now, the question is whether you make it as an option. That's another issue, but certainly I understand your concern.
Mr. Carlson?
No, I think that, thank you. The point with all that warning, still about 10% of the people that come for quasi-judicial don't have the right equipment. And it's not clear to me also, if you are on an iPad or a phone and you have the GoToMeeting app, I'm not sure if it works then. But somehow I think with just the people that have not been able to do it with quasi-judicial, we need to figure out how to communicate more effectively. And then I'm fine if we give people the option for video in the non-quasi-judicial. I just think people deserve the option there, because audio is not fully representing their views just like as if they were here. Thank you.
Citro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First, I just would like to make a statement, please. I was elected to take care of city's business. If I have to stay here 14 hours a day, I will do it. Doesn't make any difference to me. That's the job that I was elected to do. As one of the callers earlier was saying, that's our duty. And I believe she said she'd rather have red hot pokers in her eyes, something like that, as compared to this. I agree with Councilman Carlson. From what we had when we were first elected, gentlemen, to COVID, to where we are now, this city has responded in an amazing way. But in my opinion, what we're here to do, I'm a by the book kind of person. That's just the way I am. You don't like the rules, don't circumvent them, change them. And it's my opinion what we're here to do today is talk about these rules and procedures. It's how the COVID, or the effects of COVID, has affected us according to these rules and procedures. Now, CMT, I love it. But that was something that was handed down by the state, if I'm not mistaken. That was thrust upon us by our state government. Again, gentlemen, I'm here to talk about anything we need to talk about. I'm here to do my job, and I will do my job if it takes me to be here all damn day and night. But I think what we really need to talk about is rules and procedures, how COVID has affected that, how we can work around these, how we can change these if necessary, so that our business here can be more effective, not only for ourselves, but for our citizens and for staff. We all have to work together as one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Dingfelder, recognized.
Thank you. First, Mr. Citro, I think your comments appropriately reflect Councilman Miranda, who couldn't be with us today, but he sent a memo and he made reference to several rules that I think we can address later on in the meeting. In regard to the issues you brought to us, John Bennett, I think, and Mr. Carlson, I think you brought up some good points. The CMT has been, even though we kind of stumbled into it because of COVID, the response to it in the community, I think, has been very positive, because it's all about public, the public having access to us in as easy a way as possible with technology. And I mean, John, you're all about technology, and you're pushing this city to use technology in every possible way, with staff and that sort of thing. And I think it just makes sense that we extend that technology, that use of the technology, out to the community to benefit the community. That's what we're here about, is to do that. So I think to the extent that we continue to allow CMT and as a vehicle for in any possible and legal way, Mr. Shelby, I think we should. Mr. Carlson, I totally agree with you. I think that I don't understand the discrepancy between when we, allowing people to have their face on screen for quasi-judicial, but then for our general comment. And Sue Ling, if you want to give some input here, please do. Sorry about that.
Tell them we're busy, we'll call them back later.
Really. Must be CMT there. Anyway, why is Thursday morning different than Thursday night? I know Thursday night we have to have the video, but I think Thursday morning we should allow the video, because I think the communication is often a visual thing, and it's a lot easier to just tune out an audio voice that we just sort of hear up here. But at least if somebody has the ability to be on that screen and looking at us, and we're looking back and that sort of thing, I think it's a much more effective tool of communication. It doesn't mean that we have to mandate that, because some people might just want to call in or only have the technology to call in. But I think we should allow that as an option. And Mr. Carlson, I think that was your point, wasn't it? Chief Bennett, I think I agree with you about not making any radical changes until January. Our COVID numbers are just getting better. I mean, I looked at a New York Times article yesterday, and Florida is doing much better than the rest of the country right now. It seems to be shifting north and that sort of thing. But we've seen this before, where the shifts change for different reasons. So we don't know what the next couple of months are going to bring. Hopefully, we can all pray that this is a good trend and it will continue. But I agree with you. We don't need to make any massive changes, significant changes about downstairs, upstairs, and that sort of thing until January. However, with that said, John, I do think, and again, this goes to communication. I am so thrilled to see Abby and Kate and Sue and some of the others here in this room with us today. Because again, it goes to communication. When Abby stands at that podium 15 feet away from us, we can have so much of a better dialogue than seeing her on a little box. And I know it's a little more difficult because you got to come over, Abby, and we apologize for that. But I would hope and encourage that now that things are a little bit better, that we can get staff in this room as much as possible for presentations and dialogue. So those are the comments I have right now specifically about the CMT issue, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, well, yes, ma'am. You can respond.
Oh, yes,
Celine.
Celine, thank you.
In response to the audio versus the video between general public comments and quasi, it's a lot more difficult as far as general public comments. Today we only had 3, so it wouldn't have been a big issue, but if we have 10, 15, it takes time to move each speaker over as a panelist, and we only have a limited amount of panelist spots. If they come over, we have technical issues, so it is going to lengthen the meeting just to try to figure out those technical issues for the speakers. On top of that, once they complete speaking, we have to drop them from the meeting. Otherwise, they're going to have control as a panelist. They could turn on their videos, disrupt the meeting, so just consider that moving forward. So that's the difference between general and quasi.
And I hear you. Clearly, there are some issues that bring a lot of people out on a Thursday morning. But sometimes it is just, 10 or 15 people, that sort of thing. Just like a night meeting, you're juggling 10 or 15 people at a night meeting. Maybe if it's a staffing issue in terms of that sort of thing, maybe Mr. Bennett, Chief Bennett can help us with that as well. But
So
anyway,
if
I hear your concern, Suling. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could support Suling for a second, but also support council's comments. I want to reflect back when we're really in the deep throes of COVID and, everybody was in a different state of normalcy than we even are now. Councilman Carlson did a great job sending us a lot of vendor opportunities that seem to be coming out as it relates to offering different platforms. In addition to that, Russell Halpert's group in technology and innovation are looking at advancing our agenda management system, which we know as SIRE right now. And I can tell you that there are platform opportunities that may give a better public interface by video. And so if CMT goes into the future, which we probably expect it will, to increase that level of service, we may need to look at just re-platforming the entire system and give that capacity to the public and that access that we're talking about right now. And I think that really is the good time gap between COVID standing down and CMT standing up. We have a couple months to work through this and see if we can come up with a better mousetrap for everybody.
And how about the staff question, John? That seems to be an easier one.
Well, again, I mean, the more capable the technology, typically the less need for additional staff.
No,
So-
I meant staff.
Current state?
I meant staff appearing at the podium.
Oh,
instead
that's, truthfully, I like the staff level of engagement. I will speak from an efficiency point of view, that I know that I'm logged on virtually and we have unintentional or unexpected delays, that I'm working while I'm waiting to queue up. And that, I'm not going to speak for Abby and her team and others, but I can tell you the CMT, I think, has helped staff to some degree. But then there's certain issues that I know we want to be in the room. And so maybe if it's a combination of a request and the ability for staff to, because they're all doing double duty. I mean, we all toggle in and out. I mean, I have the meetings on no matter whether they're general, regular meetings, workshops, or I'm always having them in the background and ready to, to jump in because I'm preloaded into the system.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, the times when I find the staff, the virtual staff responses to council not very engaging or helpful is when there's 4 or 5 people at a conference table, because I can't hear them very well. It's hard to see who's speaking, that sort of thing. It's a little different if Abby's sitting at her desk and and it's a close up and it's right there and it's just her, but when you get that group stuff going, it's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, and I think Councilman, a lot of times that happens on interdepartmental issues or complex issues where we're trying to choreograph our comments for efficiency.
I understand.
So I don't think it happens too often. but
Historically, I understand it, but I'm just saying,
Going forward, yeah.
Yeah.
Understood.
Okay.
No, I think now that we know that council has an openness, if that's the collective request, that there could be some engagement in the room, it's helpful for all of us.
All right, I've heard from all council members. I'm going to just get my point. We have to be considerate to Madam Clerk, and what they have to do on that end as well. She's informed us it's a challenge, and we don't have the technology right now. So until we get the technology, that might not be something we can do right now until we get what we need and what it's going to cost for us to get it. No problem with that. We want the community engaged. We want our citizens engaged. As far as staff, I've talked to several department heads and staff. They like being able to be at the office, in their office, because sometimes we go long and they don't know when they're going to come up. And it puts them at a disadvantage because they could be working on some other projects and being some meetings and still have their monitor looking, waiting for their time to come up. So I wouldn't really impose that they really be here now if it's working for them right now. And we need to hear from them as well to see how do they feel as well. How do they feel about coming back into a room still with COVID? So, we have to look at giving them options as well. Ultimately, we have the final say so of those chambers. But I do think that we have to look at all options and the best options. When you talk about going to video, we know how long at night when we have some serious issues. It's not sometimes just 10 or 15 people. It could be 30, 35 people sometimes. And you're talking about 35 people on a video camera. That's a long night, gentlemen, which, hey, we get paid to be here. I get that. But when it's at nighttime, I don't want people walking in the dark. Things do happen. And late nights, they're just too late. So I think the chief can bring back some ideas before January. We can look at those and then maybe implement those things going forth. Again, talking with the other administrators and see how they feel about coming back in the chambers, and again, the time frame. So I would just say that the chief bring us back some goals and objectives before January, and then we can look at changing those rules or what have you at that particular time. Mr. Vieira, we're going to go one more last round, and we're going to bring this landing in. I saw your hand. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, and I didn't have any questions. I did send out a memo to Mr. Shelby on some suggested changes that I think would make sense, among other things. We talk about having more council meetings a month. I think that with sensible incremental changes and restraint, there's no reason as to why we need that. I think what would be wise, though, would be to have one council meeting a month for commendations, with or without ATU, police,
Ms.
fire.
Vieira, with all due respect, I understand we're going to get to those issues, but right now we just want to get to the issues of the CMT issues.
My apologies,
not the changes
Mr.
that
Chair.
are going down.
I'll hold
We'll
on
get
to
to
that.
that later.
Okay,
We just
then
wanna get
I'm
to-
done. Thank you.
Okay, anything else from Mr. Bennett in reference to that? All right, so Chief, I would just say you come back with some stern recommendations with Mr. Shelby, and that way we can kind of make some decision of what you've heard from council members and from the administration staff.
I had one other question to Mr.
You're
Bennett.
recognized.
Okay. Chief Bennett, I can't remember who it was, one of the commenters commented about the amount of time that council not only is here, but is works and that sort of thing as compared to our salaries. I don't know that the city has done a salary review of council's salary in a long time. So I would just, I'm not even going to make a motion, but I just respectfully request that, just like you do for all city employees, to make sure that our salaries here are comparable with other comparably sized cities across the country. I would ask you to take a look at that for city council. And I emphasize across the country because there's not that many other 400,000 people cities in the state. But there are many across the country, and these days, it used to be, Tampa's a cheap place to live, cost of living, cost of housing, all that stuff. That isn't true anymore. I think that our cost of living here is comparable with pretty much everywhere except maybe, the very far northeast or California. So, but anyway, I'll leave that in your hands, and that would just be an informal request.
Understood. And as we do each year, I think everybody knows that we typically call each one of you personally and talk about the increases that have been budgeted and whether you're willing to accept those or not. So we could just roll that into the analysis.
Thank you.
All right.
Any more questions for Chief? All right, thank you, sir. All right, Mr. Shelby, how do you want to start this off?
Mr. Chairman, I am aware of the fact that Ms. Feely and the legal department, Ms. Wells, are here with staff, and they have a presentation, and I believe that would be helpful, and they're prepared to move forward. But I also want to bring to Mr. Vieira's attention and the other council members that I did distribute, Mr. Vieira, your suggestions. Each council member has that in front of them, and Councilmember Miranda did provide a memo that I did provide to you. And also the third page were the things that were adopted by City Council that were discussed at the special discussion meeting in March of this year. And you see that 2 of them are X'd out because Council rejected those, but the others were actually addressed by Council favorably. But we have held off changing the rules permanently because of the state of emergency. But with proper direction at the end of today, we can review those again, see what Council wants to do, incorporate the other suggestions, and get clear direction to be able, as Councilman Citro said, to make permanent adjustments to the rules so that you can rely on them as being your standing rules. Thank you. And then, by the way, that should also include CMT when we do that too, Councilman Citro, so that is very clear to the public. Thank you.
All right, so Ms. Feely, you're up.
Good morning, Council. Abby Feely, Director of Development and Growth Management. I came before you on October 7th of this month, and we kind of revisited some discussions that had been had and some decisions that had been made in relation to setting your evening hearings at 5 o'clock. And then also being able to utilize both of your evening hearings in order to accommodate the number of cases that had come into land development and that we're working toward getting in front of you. I do have a brief presentation. Here's a quick agenda. We'll do a quick overview, talk about that rezoning special use process timing, your meeting durations since we went to the 5 o'clock, couple recommendations, and then some additional matters that you had discussed just a few weeks ago that Kate Wells is present this morning and will assist with. So typically you have 2 evening hearings a month. One was always for the rezoning and special uses. The second had been dedicated to your alcoholic beverage applications. And then you have your 2 morning hearings a month with your commendations, review hearings, staff reports. Based on a review of the current matters and discussion of City Council just earlier this month, and a suggestion that potentially commendations were to be considered on an independent day, it appears that the remaining matters could all be accommodated in your current meeting schedule without adding a meeting. So rezoning special use timing, the meetings are limited to 13 items. This has traditionally been 10 new items and 3 continued items. And that is how we would manage it. And I'm gonna show you our schedule that's used by our applicants in just a minute. If on any of our cycles, the development coordination receives more than 10, it automatically goes into the next cycle. And I'm gonna visually show you that now. So this is the schedule we publish. And it's a little hard to see. I do have a blow up I'll show you of one of those. But this is a schedule we publish every start of each fiscal year because we change over on October 1st. So we show our applicants, if you file by this cycle, this would be the tentative hearing date that you would have. And that's at the end of the green. So for September 27th, if you came in and you filed, you would have a tentative hearing date of January 20th. Now, all those dates in between are codified dates. Your application comes in, 30 days later you go to DRC, 30 days later you have resubmission, 42 days later you get ready to come to council. We set you in SIRE, you do your public notice, and then we prepare for the hearing. We have deadlines in there of our staff report, when it's due to council, when the public notice is due. So it's not just things kind of end up here. They actually are on a very structured schedule when they do. So, for example, on that September 27th cycle, we received 15 submissions, 15 complete applications. Well, we only have 10 slots. So 10 of them went to September, and 5 of them went into the October, which also only has 10 slots. So with a few days left, and that yellow 5's a little hard to see, we've already completed our October cycle. We had 10 filings. Those 10 filings are now in process, and they're moving forward for a February 2022 hearing. So right now, in theory, we should still be collecting cases for the October deadline, but we're not. We're already collecting cases under the November deadline. So that's when you see things start to exceed where our schedule has already accommodated for the 10 cases. Based on the action that you took earlier this year, we did go ahead and set the August, September, and October cases at 5 o'clock. And this is a brief chart of how many cases were on that agenda. None of them went beyond the 13 items. How many you heard, how many were withdrawn, how many improperly noticed. For a period of time a few years back, improper notice was a huge reason why we were having backlogs, because people weren't perfecting notice and then they couldn't be heard. But we had to find another cycle to put them into. Here are the times that you adjourned for each of those. Last week you heard 10 cases and you were out by 7:45. Earlier in August you heard 12 cases, you were out by 10 o'clock. So we do acknowledge that some cases take longer. There's varying amounts of public participation. So some of those do vary. But even by shifting to the 5 o'clock, for the past 4 months, we have been able to be out by 10 p.m.
Ms. Feely, I think Mr. Cecil had a question.
Of the cases that are continued, do you know how many of those were actually heard by the council before the continuance was asked? Or those continued that were requested before the hearing date?
I think it varies. Ryan's here and with me this morning, and he may be able to speak to that. I did want to also note that if we feel at the staff level, you know, I work with our team, but our team really takes the lead on that. If Ryan and the team feel like the case is not proper to be heard, it's going to have issues, or the number of changes are substantial, we do work with an applicant to try to get them to continue before they walk in your door, as we know the frustration that comes along with a case going for an hour and a half, all the public notice happening, and then, oh, we'll take a continuance. And it's like, well, we should have been reaching out to the community before that. You should have been, you know, doing some of these things ahead of time. So we do, you know, work that side of it. I will let Kate speak to the fact that we also acknowledge someone has the right to due process, and they're in this cycle. That's when their case is set to be heard. And can be a very contentious and slippery slope. So we do our best to get it in a position where it can be heard. And if we acknowledge, you know, look at this staff report, it has 52 items on here, probably not going to move forward Thursday night. It may be in the applicant's best interest to then go ahead and say, you know what, I'm gonna take that continuance, get this in a better position. So if Ryan knows,
Ms. Feely, I thank you for saying that statement you just said. If Ryan's going to come up later, I'll wait for his answer.
Okay.
And let you continue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. We continue.
Thank you. So we came to you on October 7th. We asked that you go ahead and retain that 5:01 p.m., which you did vote on, because as you could see from that long schedule, we're already gearing up to get people ready for public notice for November, December. And then to return that second hearing back to alcohol, strictly alcohol. We had asked you to give us some leverage and allow us to put some rezonings, to do some catch up from COVID and other items, but we would like to go ahead and put that back to an alcoholic beverage night. That being said, we would schedule the alcoholic beverage land development coordination that night. The alcoholic beverage averages about 3 to 5 cases. So that does still allow an opportunity for council to go ahead and use those additional items, slots on that evening. Sometimes they are used for comprehensive plan amendments. And sometimes they could be used for other items if that's where you would like to place the continuances, or you would still like to shift things around. That would give you a good amount of time on that evening and those spaces to be able to accommodate some additional cases. And then, yeah, that's what I just said. You would have that discretion to schedule additional items on that night. The additional matters, I'll speak briefly to this and then allow Kate to come up and join me. Review hearings. As Sue Ling had mentioned last on the 7th, you do typically take 2 review hearings per day meeting, and those are set at a 10:30 time. The review hearings, sometimes they move forward, sometimes they don't. I believe I had heard a council member mention if commendations were to be placed on a separate day, then us looking at this in preparation for this morning thought either you could set those review hearings at 1:30 on those days, or you could set a separate day. If you were going to do commendations on a separate day, you might want to choose to set your review hearings on that separate day as well. And then if you didn't have any, that the rest of that day you would complete your meeting, and that would be the end.
Repeat that again, Ms. Spieler. That was the accommodation on a separate day and the review hearings on that same day, correct?
Yes, so let's say you were going to say the second Tuesday of the month, we're going to do our commendations. And then we'll do those first at 9 a.m. and then at 10:30 or whatever, we would do the review hearings.
And the reason I ask you to repeat that, because I look at the schedule, and even if we take the accommodations away, you don't know how long public comment can be, you don't know how long these review hearings can be, and you still run the risk of these later meetings that we're having. That's why when I asked you to repeat what you were saying, so that might be food for thought. You may continue. Mr. Prusino, you have a question, sir?
I was going to wait until Ms. Feely was done.
Yeah, Ms. Feely.
That's how I'll let Kate speak
Okay.
a little bit on this now.
Well, can I jump in between?
Sure.
Some of these are more specific to Abby. It appears, Abby, that we treat our PDs, excuse me, that we treat our PDs the same way we treat our Euclideans when they come in terms of scheduling. But I find that sort of interesting because I would presume from a staff perspective and from an applicant perspective that a straight Euclidean rezoning, from the RS50 to the RS60 to the RS50, which we see a lot of, is not that complicated in terms of the various reviews that are required, and likewise, I don't know. I just thought maybe they could go in a different batch and be expedited for the community's benefit.
I can answer that. I mean, typically we do. Let me just say that not every application that comes in under those cycles you see make it back after DRC or make it back. So then we will use whatever Euclidean zonings that we have and do fill that in. I think Ryan does a great job at managing what's all on, who's here. The other thing is, though, we balance that with an applicant's expectations. The applicant filed under a certain cycle. They've done all the work to get there. A lot of times they have a contract or a deal or a closing or something else that's waiting or contingent on that public hearing having taken place. So we do try to make sure that they stay on track, and we balance both the Euclidean applications, the PD applications, and the overall cycle in the most efficient way that we can.
Okay. In regard to the appeal hearings, I like the idea a lot about pulling them out of the morning meetings. It's sort of a strange thing because, and Mr. Shelby can confirm this, mostly in the morning we're dealing with staff matters, we're dealing with legislative matters and that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden we kind of shift gears into the quasi judicial, appellate or appeal issues, and Kate, you can speak to this as well. I think it would be great if we could pull those review hearings and put them in the evening when we're in that quasi mode with our robes on. So that's more of a comment. Abby, you and Carol Post and I and perhaps a few others have had a discussion about the research that I did about mandatory public information sessions. You alluded to it a minute ago. Sometimes your applicant's getting a lot of negative public comment, and then you say, have you gone and met with the neighborhood? Well, no, or yeah, I met with one of them, but that sort of thing. When in reality, and we've talked about this, I found communities around the country that mandate that, and especially on a certain threshold. Again, I'm not talking about going from an RS-60 to an RS-50 necessarily on a single lot. Maybe that doesn't reach the threshold. But on a PD, and especially if we created a threshold, a PD of certain magnitude, for years, this council has said to the applicant, especially when things start breaking down, we said, have you talked to the neighborhood? And we get different responses from different petitioners and different lawyers. So anyway, I think we really need to plow forward with the idea of perhaps mandating in our zoning code at a certain threshold that those applicants, as part of their process, have mandatory neighborhood meetings. And we also talked about the possibility of an ombudsman, which I won't get into today, which is just somebody to help facilitate those meetings and make sure that there's better dialogue going on between these applicants and the neighborhoods, instead of just a unidirectional dialogue.
May I respond to that just a moment?
Yeah, and then I've got one more.
So we had talked about it in relation to the privately initiated text amendments, and we had talked about it. So what I would like to ask, and I mentioned at the October 7th hearing, is that we're asking that your February workshop focus on planning, zoning, and growth management. And based on that, I'd like to work with the legal department to be able to come back during that workshop to propose those text modifications to the code where we could incorporate those required community meetings. We'll do some research and get some items drafted up in relationship to that matter.
I think that'd be fantastic. I appreciate that. And maybe add to the list for February, my last item, which came from one of the folks who spoke earlier, about the continuances requests coming in no later than X number of hours in advance. 72 hours in advance, 48 hours in advance, something like that. Because at least that way the community's not wasting their time rallying the troops, come down here, bring your torches, et cetera, and then the applicant stands up and says, we want to continue. Well, if you wanted a continuance, at least give the courtesy to the community, staff, and everybody else, 48 or 72 hours advance notice. Now, Mr. Citro, you bring up a good point. There are occasions that during the hearing, when the questions arise either from us or the community, when the applicant decides that a continuance might be more appropriate. But that's after his or her presentation, and after we've gone deeper into it. So that's sort of the exception. But
on that note, when they're asking for that, we give them leeway to give them that.
Yes.
We have to
and our rules actually speak to that.
I have a problem with that, but we have to make sure. And the problem I have is that now we added somebody to the list now, and now it bumps other people. So I'm just figuring how we make those adjustments so we don't get overloaded again. So that's my biggest thing is, okay, we'll give it to you, but should you be allowed to be next week
Next
or
right.
line?
Right, and you're right, and I'm not sure how to deal with that from a process perspective, and perhaps Ryan, might have some suggestions.
Kate getting up, maybe she has an answer for that.
Oh, I have two thoughts on that as well.
Okay, all right,
Abby Feely, couple things. One is I leaned over to Ryan and I said, what do you think about 72 hours? I mean, I think I would think a week. I mean, the other thing keeping in mind from our side is we're issuing a staff report, and we've put a lot of time and effort into that staff report. And if the plan is going to change, sometimes it confuses the public worse when a report goes out and then they read it and they're preparing and then, oh, no, that's not what's gonna happen. Now we've got a different plan, or the plan's gonna change in between the continuance to address certain things. So that was just one thought on that. The other thing is, you know, you can't, and Kate can confirm this, you can't actually take action since it's on your agenda until the night that it's set. So if the written request for continuance comes in, you know, you're not going to take action on that until the evening hearing, because it is on your agenda and we don't have the right as staff to be taking that action.
But the code can speak to the automatic.
Agreed.
If you ask for it a week in advance, you may automatically get the first continuance or something like that.
Agreed. I guess my thought in relationship to process was, since we would be before you for that official action, we'll be able to be working with you to manage where that then is going, and that it is not bumping someone else, because we would say to you, that's now come in, and Ryan has a sheet. I'll show you his sheet just for informational purposes, but Ryan, you know, has a sheet where he tracks all this, and so we would be before you that night and be able to say to you, here's what's on your agenda that night, or we'll be able to say to you, so far, there's 3 alcohols set for the later hearing, February 24th, this continuance would be moving to that night. So, and we could look at a better tool than this, you know, so you can visually see. I know how visual you are as a board and how much that really makes a difference, but I think we could get a handle on that in terms of being able to manage that in a meaningful way.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you for all that.
Thank you, Abby. Kate Wells, Chief Assistant City Attorney. Just a few comments, and actually I was going to address the issue of continuances. So I'm glad that the speakers this morning raised it and that council's raising it, because I've heard your frustration when so many items get continued. And I think last week a significant number of continuances occurred. But thankfully, a few of those, the applicant had requested the continuance in advance of the hearing date, so council was aware of it, the neighborhood was aware of it, and you didn't have a lot of folks register to speak or on the second floor to address that. So I don't know that it necessarily has to be in the code, but perhaps in your rules of procedure where you recognize the ability to have that first continuance by right, as long as the request is made in writing, certain number of dates in advance of the hearing, so that everybody that's interested in that matter is aware of the request for the continuance. And then with respect to continuances that are made after there's been a full presentation and the public has spoken, frankly, when I was in the private sector and I was representing an applicant in a land use matter, I was prepared for a decision that evening. You are prepared to move forward with that action, and if you're not prepared, you're asking for the continuance. And it should be the exception rather than the rule that someone is allowed to get an item continued to a later date if they haven't done their due diligence on the front end. And I think that is something that we can discuss further if we do have that workshop in February and look at what's working well for other jurisdictions and see how it could work for us. But it is unfortunate when you, members of the public, and staff prepare to move forward with an item only to see it continued after an hour and a half or a 2-hour hearing. So I think that is worthy of consideration and can be addressed in the rules of procedure.
Just if I could respond to that while we're talking about it. I like the idea earlier, I think Carol Ann proposed it, of a 72-hour notice, and ideally there would be a notice to the public so the public would know and not have to show up, although maybe the vote happens on that night. But to the point that you were just making about a decision that night, it's not only unfair to the public to do a continuance after presentation, it's unfair to all the staff and us. It's also unfair, you all mentioned before, to other applicants, especially with the backlog we have right now. And so if we put a continuance after a presentation, it means we're bumping somebody else off before. And it seems like most of these last minute continuances are because applicant did not reach out to the community and they're somehow blindsided by community input. And if we had rules in place, maybe they would talk to the community more before, and then they wouldn't be blindsided by that. And so I would suggest that we put in a deterrent to keep people from asking for a continuance after the presentation. And I would suggest, and again, to be fair to everybody involved, and especially other applicants, is that we say the first you can come back is 6 months later or some farther point in the future. I don't think that they should be able to come back a month later and bump somebody else off the list who's in good faith trying to promote their project, and they've done the homework in advance to find out what the community thinks. So if it's possible, I don't know what the rules are legal side, but if we could delay it 3 months or 6 months or more, there has to be some penalty so that people will do the work they should be doing in advance. Thank you.
And certainly we can discuss the continuances in February during the workshop. My one comment with regard to the perception that if an item is continued, someone else is getting bumped off the schedule. Abby and Ryan and I have discussed that. Any items that are continued will not bump a new application off of the schedule that they are on. And I think this is why staff is recommending, if an item is continued, those exceptions. If that item is continued, continue it to the second evening meeting of the month that is set aside for AB nights, and generally has about 5 slots open. I think historically, AB applications, you have 3 to 5 scheduled that Thursday evening, leaving 5 to 7 slots for other items, and that could be where those continued or misnoticed items get moved to. And then the first evening meeting of the month is dedicated solely for the new applications that were timely filed and have been processed and reviewed by staff. So I think there's a way to deal with the continuances without bumping new applications, and it's consistent with how staff has been handling those. And when you get that request for continuance, typically you're asking Ryan what dates are available. He's always looking at that very fluid chart that he keeps where he's monitoring and tracking all the applications. Just one.
Could I just add one more thing? It seems
Sure.
like we in those continuances that happen last minute, it seems like also that very often we, and I think it's mostly Mr. Dingfelder, ask for the applicant to renotice the public. But if that's not a requirement, is it possible that we could put that requirement in, that the public would have to be renoticed if it's continued?
Yeah, that would be an amendment to our code, Chapter 27. I think it's 27-149 that sets out your notice requirements. It does identify and provide that if an item is continued to a date certain, it's not required to renotice unless that is part of the motion. So these are all really great discussion points that we could address in February during the workshop. So, Councilman Dingfelder.
Thank you. In regard to the continuances, I don't think, it's not one size fits all. There are some continuances that are strategic on the part of the applicant or the lawyer or their representative, and you can feel that it's a delaying tactic because by God, if I can continue this for a couple of months and there'll be less people down here and I'm just going to wear them out, okay? And I call a spade, and that's true, and we all know it, okay? There are other continuances that, frankly, sometimes I suggest, and y'all know that. I suggest it because I don't like yes or no, okay? I don't like black or white, and because I see a lot of gray in between. And sometimes it's a good project, but there's certain things that have come up either from council discussion, staff discussion, or community input that can make that project go forward but be better. And often, especially in a PD, that requires a continuance. So maybe in February, what we might want to talk about is when we get to those kind of continuances, that they could be allowed if there's a material or substantive change to the application, to the PD. You know, because if you're just going to continue it so you can and I'm assuming we're going to mandate some better dialogue in advance of the first hearing. So the dialogue part is done with the community, and if you're just going to continue it so I can talk to more neighbors, then I don't think that's really good. But if you're going to continue it and come back with a material or substantive change, then I think it's valid.
Yeah, with the community meeting being, if that is codified and it's a required part of the process, perhaps just for the PD applications and not the Euclidean, then applicants are on notice of the concerns of the neighborhood. I've done many of those meetings when I did work over in Madeira Beach. We walked into our first public hearing knowing exactly what the neighborhood was saying, what they were concerned about. And there was that opportunity to address those concerns before the first hearing. I think if council were to amend its rules of procedure to address the issue of continuances, applicants will know to be ready when they present their case, to be ready for a decision that night, with the exception of those situations that you're describing. Right now, I do get the sense sometimes that we want to see where the hearing goes, what kind of feedback we get, and then we'll move it out. But if the rules of procedures address how and when continuances will be addressed, the development community will know that they need to be prepared when they make their initial presentation, that they should be prepared for a decision that night, absent extenuating circumstances.
Yeah, some of the they don't have an opportunity. The applicant doesn't have they have an opportunity to talk to the community. They don't have an opportunity to talk to us until that night. So I think we don't want to have an ironclad rule of saying no contingencies, period, because sometimes there might be something that comes from up here, believe it or not, that would make that project better. And anyway, I'm just throwing it all out there. February is great.
Often staff communicates constantly with the applicants, and I now participate in the DRC meetings. So I'm getting involved, and my staff is getting involved on the front end of the application process. And I've been part of communications with the applicants and their team, and we're giving them feedback, which is being ignored. And then all of a sudden, the night of the meeting, now they're realizing those are issues. So I think these are all issues that can be addressed, either codified or addressed in the rules of procedure, and recognizing when there's that need for those extenuating circumstances.
Thank you.
So, in preparing for today, just one final comment. I was looking at your agenda for this Thursday, and I think this is an example of what council is struggling with. And I think at the beginning, Stephanie Pointer commented on how our population has grown and how the city has changed, and your agendas reflect that. So it is time to think out of the box and see what we can do differently so that the agendas are predictable and manageable. And those are terms I'm taking from Abby when she did the first workshop on alcoholic beverages and the noise regulations. Her words were, we want our code to be predictable and understandable. And that is true, I think, for everything at the city. And when I look at this Thursday's agenda, you have 5 commendations and 2 presentations, one by FDOT, which I believe is part of the quarterly presentation, and then one by the Humane Society. And yet at 9:30, we've got second readings on quite a few comprehensive plan amendments and rezonings. And while those typically go quickly, we still schedule them at 9:30, even though we've got the commendations and the public comment. So 9:30 is no longer, I think, a realistic time frame for starting anything for a time certain. And then at 10:30, we've got 2 review hearings. And again, how the city has changed. It used to be that review hearings were perhaps once a month or every other month when I was with the city the first time decades ago. Now we have standing 2 review hearings every regular meeting, and I think actually you could have more based on the number of applications that are coming in for review. And then we've got a 1:30 review hearing, which is scheduled, it's on an AB application. So this Thursday, in addition to all the commendations, all the second readings, we have 3 review hearings. And last but not least, we have 7 staff reports. And those are scheduled, I think it's understood that those start at 1:30. I'm a very linear thinker, so when I look at the schedule, I would say second reading, if the commendations, and I like the suggestion that the commendations be a separate day, because that means your 9 o'clock meeting, if you do an average of 30 minutes of public comment, your regular business starts at 9:30. Then you could do those second readings at 9:30 and have them done by 10:30. And perhaps at 10:30 you do the staff reports, or at 11 o'clock. Move those to the morning. And the review hearings, I know there's been discussion about moving them to the evening. My concern with that is you're already telling us that your evening meetings are full, that your evening meetings are running late. So I'm not sure why we would want to add I understand the desire because it's a quasi-judicial hearing, so it fits nicely with other quasi-judicial hearings that are scheduled in the evening. But why add those to an evening meeting that may already be full?
I think, Kate, Mr. Miranda and a few others were thinking of a second day to kind of take the load down. I think that was the purpose of saying remove them for a second day. I still contend if you remove the accommodation, which would be great, but look at the calendar. Now you got 2 presentations there, and they ain't 10 minutes. They're never 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think
So,
if you move the
see what I'm saying?
commendations to another day, that means your daytime, your handling, your consent agenda, your second readings, and your staff reports. And perhaps then you can schedule your review hearings for 1:30 in the afternoon and know that you'll have enough time to get through those 2 review hearings that get scheduled. If not that afternoon, perhaps, as Abby suggested, it's moved to the day you set aside for commendations. But to move it to an evening, I would be concerned about that, given the current schedule. And not that we can't have a discussion around that, but I would just ask council to be sensitive to that, given how full the evening meeting is. So that really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Certainly, I'm here with Susan Johnson Velez and Kamaria Pettis-Mackel. So any questions that you have, any comments, we're here to help move this item forward.
Did they have anything to say? Mario, either Susan?
Not at the moment, but just in response to any
right.
questions that you may
Ryan
have.
have something to say in
Thank
the
you.
presentation?
Thank you, Kate.
Mr. Carlson, you recommend?
Mr. Chair, just for scheduling purposes, could we know who else is going to present for how long, and then what's the format going to be after that? Are each of us going to make a statement, then we're going to try to vote on something? What's the?
I think once Ryan finishes up, then we'll go round table. Mr. Shelby will come back, and then we'll look at these suggestions and so forth, and then try to wrap it up.
Good morning, Council. Ryan Manasseh, Development Coordination. I'm strictly here to answer any questions. I think Kate and Abby answered most of the questions. Councilman Citro, I know you had a question on the continuances that were in the graph. I didn't break those down specifically. As Councilman Felder said, sometimes there's those material ones that do get talked about continuing at the hearing. I will say the last few night meetings we've had, those continuance requests have been coming in advance. And I'm doing my best to try to accommodate further dates to get them out and advise council so we're not overbooking you. So with that being said, I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions or help clarify any of the reports that we provided here today.
I just think that the big key is reducing the day, but also being mindful of the night. I just don't like the fact that 11, 12, 1 o'clock, I just think that's unacceptable. It does us no good. It does the folks that try to present and the people here. It does no one any good to be here that late.
Absolutely. And Council Chair, I know Abby already said it, but you know, the recommendation that was already approved for that, you know, utilizing the alcohol nights to get some of these continuances, I believe would help that. You know, we have those 10 new cases for rezonings. We have those 3 available continuing spots, but if we were to utilize that Thursday for those continued rezonings, I think it would ease the strain on that, you know, where we're getting to the 12 cases, 13 cases, and then we're pushing them out months and months for these continued cases.
And still staying at the 5:01 starting time?
I believe so, sir, yes.
Any further questions for Abby? You done?
I just just have two comments based on some of the discussion, Abby Feely, Development and Growth Management. As we work toward those community meetings, the renoticing, I did make a note about the renoticing. I just want to be cautious on that, because if you set a minimum of a 30-day renotice, a continuance that may have gone 2 weeks later would then be going potentially 45 days later. So we'll look at that in relation to what we bring back in February, but I would want to be mindful. Historically, we have used that over the years when a case is going out 60 days or 90 days, they're asking for a 3-month continuance. Our objective, and it's stated in the code, that we want to get cases in and out in 180 days. And that's why you've seen lately some of them come to you where people are asking for you to see their extenuating circumstances, which gets them beyond the 180 days. But it's our goal that they get in and they get out. We don't let people just kind of sit there and the cases linger on. So I would just make note of that. And then also, as you speak now to what cases you'll hear on what days and at what times, I would ask that you're cognizant and mindful that different staff within my portfolio serve when it's different types of reviews. So Eric comes during the day for the review hearings. He typically doesn't come at night. You have the rezoning team that comes at night. So by doing this, it does have additional demands on staff's capacity. So I'm obviously here today. This is of critical importance to all of us as we set it, and I want to listen and would provide some feedback too, depending on what avenue council desired to venture down in setting those other hearings. But if we talked about it getting ready for today, and it was like, okay, well, if we had 3 nights of rezonings, that might mean we have one planner on one night and one planner on another night. But from transportation, Mr. Scott's going to come all 3 of those nights. And we try to look at those things as we weight our capacity and our ability to provide that quality service as well. So we're here to help in whatever way we can, and interested to hear your discussion this morning. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Feely, I know a while ago I made a motion. I think it's going to come back with the February discussions. When this council denies, and then all of a sudden the applicant goes and makes a switcheroo change, so don't come back to this council when this council has heard from the community, whatever. I think we had asked for that to come back as well in February. So we want to know, because that's happening a lot lately, that they get a denial here and all of a sudden they go and do something else and we don't know. Then the community say, well, how did this happen? You guys denied that, and they've been slick about something. So I'm hoping that we can get some recommendation and some changes to that, because I think if they've denied, whatever the reason, they need to be coming back for this council to see what are their changes they did make, or what decisions that they need to be factored in, because that's been happening quite a little bit with that.
We have, I believe, 5 items already teed up on that February workshop, and that is one of those items.
All right, thank you. All right, any other questions from staff at this time? All right, Mr. Shelby, how you want to begin, sir?
Well, council, just so you have in front of you, you have the suggestion specifically. Council Member Vieira is here, who can reference that himself. You have subjects from Mr. Miranda, and again, as was said, Mr. Miranda has cited standing rules to remind council and bring to your attention. And the last thing is, council, the special discussion meeting that council had on 3/29, the action items, 10 out of 12 were agreed upon by council, but time being a great teacher sometimes, it may cause and should cause council to reevaluate before you give me specific directions, because that's one of the reasons we held off changing the rules. For instance, if you move commendations to a separate day, odds are you will get to your staff reports in the morning and be done with them perhaps in the morning. Therefore, you don't have to have staff reports scheduled for 1:30. You have had opportunities in your experience when the staff has been on call and has been, as the chief of staff says, monitoring the meetings, and they're able to get the staff into you in the morning. So just to take a look at those and to recalibrate exactly what council's pleasure is. And again, it's best, I believe, Councilman Vieira just stepped out, but to take a look at what some of the suggestions are, and perhaps council members who didn't provide it in writing certainly have their own suggestions based on your experience that you might want to share.
Mr. Carlson.
I think just in terms of format, I think we ought to, some offered it by writing, but we ought to just go around the room and get ideas and suggestions. And then are we going to try to build a consensus in here to vote on something today? Okay. I'll lean on you to do that.
I don't think we can vote on it.
Well, you can if you want to, with the exception of, in terms of building a consensus, I just note Mr. Miranda's absence. And because it's council's rules and you'll be operating, we can build a consensus, but I can prepare the list in a decision point form. And that way Mr. Miranda can also review that and address it, and we could do that at the next regular meeting if that's council's pleasure.
All right.
Well, or you could do it today, but I just want to just acknowledge the fact.
Let me say this. I've looked at a lot of the suggestions. I think the consensus that what I've been hearing is about the accommodations, moving it to a separate day. Mr. Shelby, you recognize.
Could we go around the room first, because I disagree with it?
Well, and that's, yeah, but I just want to also highlight the fact that commendations consist of things that you've already set with regard to your processes with Police Officer of the Month, the Firefighter of the Quarter, and the ATU Employee of the Quarter. Those are set council's policies. You can change when you want those to happen. Your rules state normally that they should occur at workshops, but obviously that rule hasn't been followed. The other thing that was also, and Ms. Wells highlighted that, besides your commendations, you also have presentations. One of them is set quarterly, and that's the FDOT presentation. That's coming up. And of course, that engages a lot of discussion. And also there are presentations that are related, presentations that are related to things that are not on the agenda. And those things, again, are not related to city business directly, or if they are not related to a staff report. So just be mindful that when you state commendations, also keep in mind the effect that adding presentations by people outside the city, what that does to your agenda and your control over the time. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to
Mr. Vieira, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. So we're talking about what, proposals or?
Yes, sir. We're going to go round table.
I mean, I don't need to take up more time on a meeting to talk about saving time, other than to say that, I mean, I put out an email. I stand by it. I think that by doing that, we can save a great deal of time. And these can be things that if there is something, a commendation, for example, on something that must be done on a certain day, that can be accommodated, workshops, et cetera, different things like this, can be accommodated, but as a general rule, I think that these will go a long way in terms of saving time. If all that we can agree on is the commendations, that's awesome, that's great, but I think we should do something today. Thank you.
Mr. Maniscalco, go round table.
Thank you very much. When I was first elected in 2015, a gentleman told me, your life will be different now, meaning it's going to be very, very busy. And for the last 6.5 years, longer than that, I've been very, very busy. Getting into this, running for office, I knew that it was a full-time commitment. This isn't a part-time job to me. I don't care if I'm here only on Thursday or we're here 7 days a week or whatever it takes to get the job done. The city is growing. We are very busy. We've come out of that recession. It's not 10 years ago where construction was stagnant. There's a lot going on and there's a lot to catch up on. I appreciate the suggestions. But I'm not here to complicate things any further. I'd like for us to come to a consensus. I think moving the commendations would help significantly for those daytime meetings. I see the suggestions from Councilmember Vieira regarding leaving police, ATU, and firefighter in place. But like you see this Thursday, we have a lot of presentations and commendations, and that right there is going to be 2 hours, and then we have public comment, which could be who knows how long. So I think moving it to a different day, a month, for some of these commendations and presentations would be very, very helpful. Because if we free up that time, we can get to those staff reports before lunch and other items before lunch, and we won't be here all day or all day rolling into a night meeting. So that would be helpful. In regards to the night meetings, if we had, an extra one a month, I think that would be beneficial. The rest of council may not agree with that, but at least to maybe even temporarily until we catch up, because I think we're just falling behind. Our our agenda items are between 10 and 13. They don't always have to be that way, but perhaps it's a temporary situation that we add another night meeting until we catch up to that, if we even get caught up. But those are just my suggestions. Thank you.
Scully, Rick.
Yeah, and I just want to thank everybody for putting forward their ideas. We may not exactly agree on all these ideas, and one of the reasons of doing this is that we all have a different perspective. We can throw the ideas out and try to see where we end up. I don't agree with the idea of adding another night meeting. I think there are efficiencies that we can find to try to work on this. I think we need to be careful about adding additional meetings because it's confusing the public. It also is it takes a lot more time from the public, and it takes a lot of staff time and others. Of course, we're willing to go to wherever we can or need to go, but and we are busy in the times we're not in council. We're busy meeting with constituents and working on other issues in the community. But I think adding additional meetings is complicated for a lot of reasons. Also, if we were to, I'm against adding additional meetings, but if we add any, I think they should be temporary. The situation we're facing right now with land use issues is because of 2 or 3 reasons. One is that we had COVID and also the protests a year ago. They put us behind. Also, the economy is booming right now. At some point, the economy is not going to be booming, and we won't have to add any additional meetings. And so if we do something, I think we ought to look at it as a 3-month or 6-month solution to try to get through the backlog and then not make it a permanent thing. But we have to be careful because the public has an expectation that we're going to meet on Thursdays. And if we suddenly start doing meetings like this, it's really hard for the public to understand that we're going to do this. And no matter what channels we use, people are not going to see it. Plus, people have a hard time getting there because of their families, et cetera. I agree with everyone's comments on the accommodation, but here's how I think about it. I don't think we should do another day. I think we should just limit them. And there was a proposal to limit them to a certain number per year. I think we ought to limit them to 4 per council member per year. I think there are way too many accommodations, and that's the problem with it. If we limit it to 4 per council person per year, it not only limits the time, but it makes them a lot more important. If we only have 4 to give out, then the people receiving them know that this is not just something that we hand out as a piece of paper. It's something really important. We only have 4 that we can give out per year. And if you want to choose 5 or 3, it doesn't matter. But when we get up to 10 each or some larger number, then it's not as important and significant anymore. But if we limited them, it would also limit the amount of time that we have to go through. And we should limit the number per meeting also. But if we each only have 4, that's still, what is it, 28 that we're working on. So that's like 1 every other week. But still, limiting them makes them seem more important. I agree with the point that we need to limit the number of workshops and the number of presentations. And similarly, maybe it should be one per person per workshop, or a certain number per year that we're limited to. Even if we had 1 per person per workshop, that's still 7 per workshop. That's still too many. So we need to have an overall limit of the number that can be covered in a workshop, and we need to have an overall limit of the number of presentations. But I think we should have a limit for each of us per year. These are some of the most important discussions we have, but still we should limit, except under special circumstances, we should limit the number. Also, I don't remember how many months have this, but there are some months that have 5 Thursdays, and we typically don't have meetings on those Thursdays. And if we just added those Thursdays, that would add some additional time, and we could maybe even do that on a permanent basis or do it on a 6-month basis. The 5 p.m., I don't know why we do 5:01 instead of 5, but 5 p.m. I think is a good idea. It helps us get out early, helps the staff get out early. I think we should make that permanent, but that will help us get through all of these. Again, I'm against setting up separate meetings. One reason why I'm against setting up, for example, a Tuesday accommodation meeting is that the benefit to the people getting the accommodation is that the public's watching. Well, if it's on a Tuesday morning, the public doesn't know to watch. And so if they're only going to be able to replay the video to their friends, then we could do it anytime. But if we're going to do it in a separate meeting, I think Tuesday morning is a good idea. That's all I have. Thank you.
I respect everything Mr. Carlson has said, but the only problem is that, like Mr. Citro says, following the rules. I respect everything he just said. But when I go around and look at the number of accommodations that everyone has given out this year so far, when I look at how sometimes we circumvent the rules sometimes. You know, it's good to have these ideas, but are we going to be firm when we implement them? Are we going to be firm when we implement them? So I'll give you a chance, Mr. Beer. I just want to put that in. And Mr. Carlson made a lot of points there. But at the end of the day, when I sit back and I look at the list and I go and I look my eyes at each council members, I know I've been over before. I can go several councilmen been over before. I can go several councilmen sometimes we talk to them, public comment, a lot of different issues. So when we go to implement, you got to stay firm to the rule. Mr. Citro, you recognize Mr. Vera. I'll get back after the J fellow, but I want to get the round table first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I heard a very wonderful statement on television Sunday, one of the political shows Sunday morning. And the comparison of coming out of this COVID is like restarting your computer. It doesn't just automatically start right back up. It has to go through a series of phases before it can get up and running. You have to put in passwords. Programs have to start back up. Some computers, like Apple's, defrag so that everything is set and ready for you to start work. It doesn't happen immediately. And COVID has changed our society, and we're restarting. Any type of changes that are thought about today, mentioned today, in my opinion, it's not about changing the time in which our meetings are and the way we run our meetings. It's time management. I think we can all do, I know, me included, we can all do a little bit better of time management. How we get to that point, that's for us all to decide. And I will adhere to whatever changes we make, but I go back to being a by-the-book type of person. Whatever type of changes that we make need to be put into our rules and procedures and followed. Now, I'm not sure if we can have these next 2 months until after the first of the year to do a trial basis to make sure that they're working for us, and then after the first of the year, put them as our rules and procedures. But if we're going to make changes, let's adhere to them, let's stick to them, and let's make sure that they are in our so-called rules and procedures. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Stanfield, you recognized. You recognized. You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you put up on the overhead, under the staff slides, the recommendation? Whoever's controlling that, I don't know. There we go. Okay. Even though they might not feel it all the time, I respect our zoning staff tremendously, and I want to give them praise for all their hard work. Including this recommendation, you know, it's sort of, it is a moving target. I think Mr. Carlson talked about the economy. I've been here through a couple of cycles. Back in 2003, 2004, we were in the same kind of cycle. Abby, you remember, some of the others who were here remember. It was so similar to this. It was crazy, and there was so much going on, and so many, you know, plan amendments and rezonings, et cetera. And then, of course, the recession came and kind of went down and that sort of thing. And now here we are back up again. And I got a feeling, as you alluded to, Bill, it might not last forever. Seems like people want to move here, and with that comes a lot of rezonings. So anyway, for now, I think we can only presume that we're going to be in this busy state for quite a while. But I think staff's recommendations are very sound. I think that the 501 start has helped. It's helped get us out earlier. And I think the other chart that Abby put up that shows over the last 2 months or so since we've been doing that, that we have been getting out at a reasonable time. And I can tell you, I for one have tried to cut back on some of my questions and not be as lengthy out of respect for the hour of the night. And I will continue to do that. But I think that the 5 p.m. is important, but I think that the ceremonial day is really a good idea. I don't mind all this ceremonial stuff. The commendations are very nice, and they're very well deserved from the various people that all of us bring in, especially Mr. Vieira. but Louis, I respect that, because you're out there in the community and you're plugged into so many different organizations and you're bringing these good people, and I respect that. So I don't know that we should be cutting those out or cutting those back. But I think we should have a ceremonial morning to do that, and to include the Officer of the Month, the Firefighter of the Quarter, and the ATU of the month as well. I think that, I don't know, I think that those ceremonial activities should be consolidated into one very pleasant, upbeat morning that doesn't conflict, that's not constrained, and that sort of thing. Mr. Chairman, hand in hand with that, and I love you, you know that. I've got to point out something that you're doing that is a little bit different than your predecessors, and I know you're doing it out of a good heart, but it does take extra time, is on these ceremonial items, you want to hit each one of us, okay? And that's new. Your predecessors just said, are there any councilmen who'd like to speak? And sometimes it was 6, and sometimes it was just 2. You know, there's folks that Louis or Bill might bring in here that I don't really know them, and I can read their story and that sort of thing, but I don't really have anything to say. But the minute you call on me, okay, I feel the need to say something, because you don't want to be the jerk that doesn't say something nice to that person. But I just want to point that out, because you have a good heart and you want to respect all of us. It does add time, and I've been hesitant to say that, but I'm just.
You know why I do that, Mr. Defoe? You know, when people come before this council and they have a chance to be on TV and to get an accolade, it's a big thing to some community leaders. And I just feel remiss if you have a council up here and one guy says something nice to that citizen versus this whole council saying, wonderful job, thank you for being here, thank you for what you do. That's why I do it, because it means so much to those folks when they come here, and that's why I do it.
Well, maybe
but if that's an issue,
right?
I have no problem.
Yeah, no, but maybe if it's on a ceremonial day, it's not as big a deal, because we have the time.
Right.
We've got 3 hours to do it, you know, whatever. But on regular mornings, when we've got a schedule that I can't remember, Kate pointed out or Abby pointed out, this coming Thursday is just mind-boggling. You know, just our daytime schedule, and
I'll take it under advice.
Yeah, and I'm not making a big deal about it. And like I said, you know how I feel about you. So anyway, I think there are 2 main things that I think we should do. Is I think we should figure out what an appropriate ceremonial day. And by the way, my wife, who's been watching this council for a long, long time, going back to the 80s when she was a TV reporter and covering this council. She said that back in the day, and I'm sorry Charlie's not here, that they met on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I don't know if you remember that, Orlando, but they met on Tuesdays and Thursdays back in the day. And then at some point they decided they could consolidate everything into Thursdays. So, you know, with that said, I think if we set up a ceremonial day, I think it will help unclog our regular Thursdays. Other than that, I think the recommendations of staff are sound. And I'd like to see us pull some of those appeal hearings out of the morning and put them somewhere else into an evening. But I don't feel overwhelmingly strong about that. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, you know where I'm coming from when I said that.
I'm good.
And in regard to
thick skin, you know.
Yeah, we have to, don't we? In regard to Mr. Citra's comments and Mr. Miranda's memorandum, I think once we settle down into a regular pattern, we can change our rules, because that's what we do. And then once we change them, sure, we should try and abide by them as best as we can. but we can always vote on the fly to modify them if something comes up.
All right. Mr. Shelby, I'm going to give you some points to take down, and then we're going to see if council wants to wait for Mr. Miranda, since these are some possible critical changes. Number one, let's see if we want to look at the recommendations that has been submitted by staff, by Ms. Feely. It's on the screen now. Two, a separate day for the ceremonies. I think that those are too critical. I looked at the public comment. We already have a rule in play. We give everybody 3 minutes so the public can know. It is a 3-minute call unless it's over. Is it 15 people, Mr. Shelby? Is that correct, sir?
The rule that was discussed that council agreed upon as a result of the special discussion meeting on March 29th was that public comment up to 14 speakers, they got 3 minutes each. If there were 15 or more speakers, it went to 2 minutes each. That was only done once, Mr. Chairman. And after that time, I believe council decided to put that rule in abeyance pending discussion.
There was kind of a public uproar about that, so.
Now, council, I just want to talk about public comment because Mr. Miranda did reference that in his memo. And council rules do state that 30 minutes shall be allotted for public comment, with each person permitted to speak on matters not scheduled for a public hearing. And it also says that preference shall be given to speakers wishing to address numbered items on the agenda. Those speakers remaining after the allotted time shall have the opportunity to address City Council at the end of the meeting. There are a couple of issues about that when you talk about CMT, those people who sign up to talk about something that perhaps is not on the agenda, who have to wait, that's up to the clerk to manage those people subject to the course of the entire meeting. The benefit to CMT during the state of emergency is you try to get that out of the way as much as possible with the exception of public hearings. So that complicates things. The other thing that we had attempted to do at one point, many years ago, was to follow the procedures over at the county commission, where speakers actually filled out speaker cards, similar to what they do, Su Ling, now online when they sign up to pre-register. Is that right? There's a request on the web form for what they're going to be speaking to. So that way you can actually, if they sign up that way or sign up with cards, then a clerk member or a staff member can actually put those cards into order and call them. Rather than first come, first serve sign up whenever that is, they go by what's on the agenda. The most important thing the law requires you to do is before you take final action on something, in other words, everything on the consent docket, people must have the opportunity to address that before you can take a final vote on it.
Which brings a question to me, Mr. Shelby, what I was thinking about this before you said that, is if we've had a 30-minute mandate or a 30-minute limit. We used to enforce it, and I don't know when they adopted this statute, but now it seems to me that this statute basically would override that 30-minute mandate or 30-minute limit, because if there's 50 people and they all say, I want to speak to that legislative item that's on your your consent agenda or whatever, or that purchasing item or whatever it is that's on there, all 50 of them have a right to speak, according to my understanding of the statute you just referenced. So I don't know how we can even have that 30-minute rule unless it's aspirational. But other than that, I don't know how we can enforce it if 50 people showed up.
Well, and I believe that it is a 2014 rule, if I recall correctly. Or is it 2016? Either way, the point is, yes, you do have to give the people the opportunity. Doing so does not necessarily void it, but the truth of the matter is, and by the way, I should point out that long before, 10 years before that was required by the legislature, council changed its rules to be consistent with that because that's best practice. So the Florida law required every municipality to do what Tampa had been doing for many years. Because, you know, your commitment to transparency and fairness, especially with regard to public participation, you know, is second to none, frankly. So in that sense, yeah, speaker cards can actually create a different kind, and I haven't done this in a long time. There was a process years ago that there was concerns about the clerk having to be responsible for all those cards, but now with everything being virtual, there are things that could perhaps be done online. It may require T&I to get involved in that. But specifically to your question, if council sets forth aspirationally what it wants to accomplish, we can provide the processes to allow that to happen. So it's just clear on what council wants to do. Certainly if 15 people show up, but see, the thing is, and this has happened, when there's something very pressing in the community, and the second floor or a Tampa Convention Center was filled with people, council was disinclined to say, I'm sorry, this is something that's not on the agenda. You're going to have to wait till the end of the meeting when you have all those people waiting. So that, I mean, there's the reality of the situation versus aspirational. So it's a balance, council. So
Well, I think, Mr. Shelby, in this day and age, in the way public comment's been going, we've always exceeded 30 minutes. I mean, so to me, something that's there, we're not even following because we haven't had a chance to really follow, because sometimes we get a number of people here and we're over 30 minutes.
And the question is, when do you want them to speak? Because there was a time, frankly, that council did have a rule that had people speak at the end of a meeting. As a matter of fact, many years ago, going maybe on 20 years ago, those were at the end of the meeting and the TV cameras were turned off and they weren't even televised.
That ain't right.
But
that ain't right.
But that's,
I'm sorry, that ain't right.
But that, the reality is, council, there are jurisdictions that say, okay, we're opening the consent docket for public comment. Some of the way what happens situationally is somebody picks something on, let's say, the Public Safety Committee, and no matter what the public safety item is, can somehow become 3 minutes on something tangentially related to the item. So people know, and that's what happened when we tried to limit things to just what the items on the agenda are. Miraculously, they turned into things that went beyond what the agenda was, and the question then is, do you then stop them? Do you want to get into the process of controlling people's speech at public comment? And council has never been inclined to do that, as long as it's, you know, as long as it keeps the decorum of the meeting, as long as it's respectful and it supports the purpose of moving your meeting.
Well, I hear the county does have a good system in play. Maybe we should look at what their system is. I'm not really familiar with it, but maybe that'd be something you can bring back to us and explain what their system is.
Happy to do that if that's council's pleasure, if that's your direction, Mr. Chairman.
Any objections to that, gentlemen? Mr. Vieira?
I don't have an objection. May I say something real quick, if I may, which is, you know, Councilman Carlson made some comments that I think are really good in terms of the spirit of them, which is, I don't know, there's a saying, I don't know if I made it up, but it's that you can't change people, but you can make them tame their excesses. And I think we maybe, a lot of us have to tame our excesses whenever it comes to not only commendations, staff reports, comments. Councilman Dingfelder talked about talking less in land use hearings. Nobody was expecting that, by the way. I'm just saying, hey, we all got our excesses. You know, I personally favor one more day for commendations, so long as they're done responsibly. And I think, and Councilman Carlson, correct me if I'm wrong, sir, I think you were talking about commendations within council, not outside of council, correct? Yeah, that's what I thought. So something of that nature, I'd have no objection to whatsoever. And then in terms of having more meetings just for general counsel outside of commendations, like Councilman Carlson, strongly opposed to that. You know, if you got a size 34 waist and over 2 years you go up to size 40, the answer to that is not to buy size 42, it's to go down to size 36. You know what I mean?
Someone disagree with you, though.
I know, right? But that's just my view. So that's all I wanted to say. Now, I do need to leave, speak of the devil, in about 5 minutes or so for a
We're going to get by
commitment for-
12:15 at least.
Yes, sir.
So
Thank
Louis,
you.
the other alternative is to hold your breath on those tight jeans. So that's what I've been trying to do.
I know. I got
since
the
COVID, you know.
the COVID 10 and like I said, the Uber Eats 15. So yeah.
Well, to that, Mr. Chair, you can't put 10 pounds of mud into 5-pound pants either. You know, so if we keep getting more and more and more and more and more, again, it goes back to time management.
You're right.
I just want to point out something that I believe has been very effective. It was a discussion that was recommended by the Chief of Staff, and I think it's been very successful, where you have these staff reports that are handled by a report, a memorandum that comes out in advance of that. And Mr. Chairman, for the small amount of time that you invest going through those to see if you can relieve staff from the need for presence to have your questions answered, even with regard to even the necessity to come in for an item over $3 million. That has really cut down the amount of appearances and the amount of time spent with staff and allows you to move the business that much quicker. So I think just to recognize council and to recognize the effect that that's having, I think that has really been, for the amount of time that you invest upfront in the housekeeping, you gain substantially more time at the back end.
That is working, Mr. Chairman. Point noted. Mr. Dingfellow, you recognize.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Mr. Vieira, and I too have to leave in a few minutes, but in regard to some of your other items on your memo, I just wanted to say, when you talk about no council member should have more than 2 workshops on a particular workshop, the problem is for example, this workshop that Abby was talking about in February, you know, at the end of the day, if we look back at Sue Ling's minutes and it says Dingfelder motion, it might just be because we all came to the conclusion, chair asked for a motion, I make the motion, but it's not necessarily, quote, mine. And I think I would be a little leery on that. Now, I think if a particular council member started monopolizing the workshops with his own agenda, you know, then I think that would be different. But I don't really think that that's happening, at least to the best of my knowledge. I can be corrected if I'm wrong. And similarly, staff reports, I don't think we could, I don't know if we should have a limit on staff reports. Sometimes, I mean, maybe it's aspirational again. You know, five or six is probably a good number because they do take some time, especially if they go beyond a written report. But again, it should be aspirational because sometimes there's urgent things that need to get fleshed out quickly.
But I think I've continued. Well, those are real hot. I let them stay. If those are mediocre, I've always said continue those so you know we can move on. So I think we managed those pretty well.
I think so too. And the administrative update twice a month. I think that currently we have the administration update twice a month because we have 2 regular meetings twice a month.
And that was specifically a request made from the Chief of Staff to have that ability to bring pressing items
Yeah, I think
and place on the
every
agenda.
single regular meeting should have that as a slot, which it does.
It does.
And sometimes he uses it and sometimes he doesn't. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
And Council, can I just make one more obvious point? And forgive me for saying this, but everything that you add to your agenda requires at least 4 votes of council.
Including all those workshops.
Even if it's aspirational, I think we ought to try to limit in the area of accommodations, workshops, and presentations. We ought to limit the number that each council member is allowed to put in. That way, we'll focus on the ones that are really important. And to the point earlier about releasing staff on staff reports, that's great for the ones where the written report suffices, but we need to make sure that we're not in a rush when we get the one that needs to be discussed. And the good thing about this council is that one of the big complaints we get is that our meetings go long, but one of the reasons is that we're also not a rubber stamp city council. And the public appreciates the fact that we discuss issues, even though it's a pain to staff to pull issues from the consent agenda. Sometimes we discuss them thoroughly. We open up the information to the public. The public has information on it, full information, and then we're able to make decisions. So I appreciate that we're able to do that. But if we at least try aspirationally to limit the number of items that we bring up, it will hopefully increase the importance of all of them. Thank you.
Mr. Shelby.
And Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate Ms. Wells bringing this to my attention before you all leave. We have, and I'm sure Ms. Lucas is aware of this, that we have this Thursday 4 review hearings that have yet to be scheduled because we wanted to have a discussion and have some direction. So when we come back this Thursday, when should those hearings be scheduled? Should they be scheduled for a commendation day in January, or should they be scheduled for 1:30 in the afternoon, starting in January?
What would they normally be scheduled for?
10:30 on 10:30.
In the morning.
But I mean, what, in November, December?
No, right now you're all the way booked till when, Suling? Now, at least January or February.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And those are mind you, a review hearing is when somebody came in to get a development order, and for whatever reason, it's now frozen until council hears it. So the council's action is the resolution. So putting it off several months delays that ability of that person.
Could we consider putting those on the AB night?
Well, you heard Ms. Feely address that issue, and the question.
I don't know if we got to a definitive answer on it. I don't know.
What is the recommendation?
And again, I don't want to burden staff and.
Chair, Kate Wells, Chief Assistant City Attorney. With regard to the review hearings, adding them to an evening meeting, which would be the AB night, staff is asking, and I agree with the recommendation, that we keep that night open for continued rezonings and misnoticed rezonings. To add those to the evening, those are going to be long nights for you, and I recall Abby discussing that staff that is available for a review hearing is different from the staff that would be there for the AB or the rezoning. So it would impact
So maybe we should do it on a regular day in the afternoon.
That's our recommendation, and we can see how that works.
Is there a night meeting that night?
Excuse me?
Is there a night meeting on that same night?
I'm not sure which night we're talking
Oh,
about.
okay. I guess you didn't give a record of what night you want to do it on in January. So
It's usually regular sessions, and we don't normally have it unless you add a night session.
So that should be our key, is we should find a day in January where it's not a night meeting, and we could just continue on into the afternoon and schedule it for 1:30.
And with setting up the ceremonial day, it would be interesting then to see how your hearing meetings go, and if that does allow you sufficient time in the afternoon for the review hearings. Thank you.
And Council, I would just recommend that you finish out, consistent with what the Chief of Staff said, finish out the year as it's going, and let's start planning for January, because that's where you're starting to book things into now, and we can work on the calendar.
Would the ceremonial day be on a Tuesday? Is that what council's leaning toward, if we did a ceremonial day?
Generally, yes, I believe. Is council, I haven't heard any objections to a Tuesday daytime.
No, I'm against it. I would rather just find efficiencies during the day, but if we must do it, then Tuesday morning would be my preference.
May I, if I
You
may?
recognize
Just
that.
really fast, I mean, I'm for it, but I think Councilman Carlson and I, and Councilman Dink, I guess, well, everybody works, but I'm very sensitive to the fact that we have a person here who's a professional. So, I mean, listen, I came up with a darn idea. I'll support it, but just making note. I don't want to burden someone who's in public office professionally, otherwise, or whatnot. But I think it's a good idea. I'm thinking out loud, which is never intelligent. I'm going to turn off my mic. Thank you.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, as I said earlier, the purpose of giving commendations is so that the people can be seen by the public. But if it's not on a Thursday, probably 25% of the people are going to see it. It's not as good for the recipients either. I think it's better to reduce the number of commendations. That way we elevate the importance of them instead of giving lots away.
So that, I guess we could give that some thought if you want to bring it back, or you on Thursday.
Why don't we just get it
Start
off the
planning.
dime?
Then that
And we'll let Mr. Miranda chime in, but at least for purposes of consensus building, Mr. Chairman, as a matter of consensus, I'll move that starting in January, we have a ceremonial day that would be on a Tuesday. That would not, well, I guess I don't have to worry about night meetings on a Tuesday, So anyway, a ceremonial day on a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning. That would include not only commendations, but also the other ceremonial activities that we have, including Employee of the Month, Employee of the Quarter, etc.
All right, Mr. Dingfelder has, moved. Celine?
Can we, I give a recommendation maybe the week of the CRA, so that way it's not in the same week of a regular session, so you won't have too much going on in the same week, and we can have a time certain.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
And then the CRA week tends to be a little bit of a slower week, so I think that's a good idea.
And with regard to scheduling the rooms, this may require coordination with Abby's office regarding the booking of other boards that do use this room.
At least it's by January, so we can make that shift.
Yeah, I just checked with Abby Feely. I just checked with Kamara. So the BLC does meet on Tuesday morning, the third Tuesday of the month.
And what's
the
but ours
BLC?
we're talking about is second Tuesday, so that would work out fine.
Yeah, I have the calendar here, but we can work this out, Council.
All right, so be more specific, and it's not binding, I guess, if we want to give Mr. Miranda an opportunity to vote.
It would be 9 a.m. on a Tuesday of the
The
month.
second Tuesday of the month.
Ideally, the second Tuesday of the month, which coincides with the CRA meeting.
Right.
And a
The
night meeting.
The CRA week. Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, Council, just and the clerk has been very good about planning this year's calendar. With regard to the fifth Tuesdays, there are 2 fifth Tuesdays next year in 2022, I believe in March and September. That was an issue that was raised. But also, one of the things that we had to deal with to play catch-up was to have full regular meetings and night meetings. Normally, when the council and the clerk would agree that when the calendar is planned, when there's a day meeting of regular business, we have tried to not schedule any night meeting. The night meetings were only on the 2nd and the 4th, which coincided with CRA days in the morning and workshops in the morning on the 4th. Because they're very onerous on you.
As you speak to Mr. Chairman, to get this to land, just to clarify, my motion would be that we create a ceremonial morning on the second Tuesday, starting in January, on the second Tuesday of the month, to hold those activities.
All right, motion on the floor. Madam Clerk.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to get to you, Mr. Carlson.
I just want to get clarification as far as review hearings. Will they be held on ceremonial days? Because we still need a time certain for those review hearings. And if so, how many are we limited
So
those
the
hearings
review
to?
hearings in the afternoon would be the intent, or not necessarily?
Kate Wells, I think initially we are recommending that the review hearings be in the afternoon of your regular meetings.
Or a regular meeting?
See how that goes, and if we need to adjust again, we can look at other options. But
Okay.
that's our recommendation.
All right, so I'll just leave that alone in regard to my motion. My motion is simply on the ceremonial.
Correct.
Ceremonial Tuesday. Ceremonial second Tuesday of the month.
All right. Mr. Dingfelder made the motion. Mr. Vera seconded. Discussion, Mr. Carlson, and then Mr. Citro.
Yeah, just to the review hearing idea, if we add them, the staff's already said not to do this, but if we add them, it's going to be very confusing to the public, and so I definitely think we should not do that. Mr. Dingfelder, could you please modify your motion to put a time limit on it? I think this is a temporary situation that we're facing, and that we should just maybe do it through June next year and then revisit it, or we can revisit it in April or something to see if we want to extend it beyond June. But I think that this backlog is going to be run through by March or April.
Okay, what are we talking about now? We talking about
6 months?
reviews, or we talking about the ceremony?
No, we're talking about the ceremony.
I'm talking about the ceremonial thing. If we're going to add an extra half day, and by the way, for the public to know, we spend the days leading up to the meetings, meeting with staff and meeting with the public to hear their concerns about issues that we're addressing. So it's not like we're working or not working for the city, it's just whether we're doing another meeting. And so I think that this is a temporary issue that we're trying to solve because of the backlog of and high demand for.
I'm amenable to your amendment.
Do a 6-month thing and see how it works, and then
A
go back to
6 month
regular.
of what, if I
From
can?
January till
Order.
June. From January till June.
To do what?
That the ceremony, we would implement the ceremonial day.
Well, the only thing is, in terms of planning your calendar ahead, and the clerk is planning the calendar for next year now, then also even, and I know how much work, for instance, Councilmember Citro's aide goes through planning working with the departments to be able to coordinate all of these things in advance, so that they're on the calendars and all that pre-planning is necessary for doing it.
Correct.
So when you say between now till June, it really is between now till March or February or March.
But they've already done the schedule for almost the first half of next year, and this isn't on it, so they're going to have to change it anyway. I mean, we could say that in April we're going to revisit it, whether we want to continue beyond June. But I don't see why we should do something permanent that is to solve a short-term problem.
What does the calendar run? Is it run on the fiscal year to when you do the calendar?
Yes, until April, actually. So so now we're gonna schedule from, I think it goes to April. So April to April.
April to April.
Or May to April, I'm sorry.
You want to try 3 months, 3 or 4 months of the idea till April and see how that goes?
Our calendar currently goes to April 2022.
I think you see how
it
it
includes
works first.
April.
Correct. So the next calendar that comes out will begin with May.
Okay, so in light of all of these comments, I will modify my motion to say the ceremonial day on the second Tuesday of the month for January, February, March, and April, and then we'll see how it goes.
Mr. Citro, you recognize.
Mr. Dingfelder, Councilman Dingfelder, is this all commendations? Because if it's including fire, police,
Yes.
and ATU,
Yes.
Mr. Shelby has pointed out a very, very good point.
Their cycle's different.
We not only have to deal with the officer of the month, the firefighter of the quarter, the ATU of the quarter, but we're also asking all these people that come and give their accolades, boasting gift certificates and whatnot, that they're having to switch. I will say yes, that the people that we give commendations to for their great deeds in the community, put them on a separate day. Police, fire, ATU, I believe, and I feel wholeheartedly should stay on a Thursday so that they can get the best recognition and that we don't have to change a whole lot of other things around for them.
Okay, if I could respond.
You recognize, sir.
I've been watching the time that police and fire and ATU it's grown from 10 minutes, what it used to be 10 or 15 minutes, and has grown into like a half hour because they deserve it, et cetera, et cetera. But my intent speaks to ceremonial activities, and that includes not only the regular commendations to citizens, well-deserving citizens, but also police, fire, and ATU. That was the intent of my motion. I don't believe it's any less wonderful to get it on a Tuesday in front of the cameras, okay, than it is on a Thursday. People will get used to it. People will tell their friends and family, watch it on Tuesday. They can watch it on replay, et cetera. I don't know if there's such a word as replay anymore, but anyway.
Madam Clerk.
I've just been informed of the calendar. It looks like HPC after March does have the meeting room until, let me see, starting in March.
What is HPC? What is that?
Starting in April, they'll have the
I
second
think the calendar-
Tuesday of the month.
As long as we have
that?
sufficient notice.
HPC, what is it?
Historic
Preservation.
preservation.
Oh.
But we can bounce them. It's our room.
Abby, Kamaria was looking, that appears to be there's only one conflict during those months. So we can make, given that we have plenty of notice now, we can go ahead and switch that around. That's not a problem. I'll work with that.
All right, Ms. Dingfelder, please restate the motion. It's going on, I want to get about 12:30. Let's take this so we can get out of here.
Right. So a lot of good input from council, and that's what we're trying to do is build some consensus. It might not be unanimous, but my motion is on the second Tuesday, starting in January, February, March, and April, we will have a ceremonial day that includes commendations and employee recognition. And then after that, we'll review it in March, perhaps, and go from there.
Ms. Dingfelder, there's a motion on the floor. Have a second?
I'm going to pull my second. Here's why. I'm joking, of course. I second.
All right.
Mr. Vieira, I'm going to kill you, man. All right. Mr. Dean has a motion on the floor. Ms. Vera has second. Get a roll call vote on this, please, Ms. Madam Clerk.
Carlson,
I'm against creating a separate day, but for the sake of consensus, I'll vote yes.
Maniscalco,
Yes.
Dingfelder,
Yes.
Citro,
With all due respect, Councilman, I cannot vote on no.
Vieira,
Yes.
and Goode.
Yes.
Motion carried with Citro voting no and Miranda being absent.
All right, now, the recommendations, we had no motion on staff recommendations, correct, Madam Clerk? Correct. Okay, there needs to be a motion on the recommendations in reference to Ms. Feely's, Ms. Maniscalco's motion, and a second on the recommendations? Second by Mr. Carlson. Roll call.
Maniscalco,
Yes.
Dingfelder,
Yes.
Citro,
Yes.
Vieira,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
and Goode.
Yes.
Motion carried unanimously.
Okay, gentlemen, just like I said, we had some fine things on the print, so if that's the case, let's kind of adhere to some of the rules for everybody, okay? Ms. Shelby, anything else, sir?
Well, we'll synthesize and digest this, and we'll begin work on it.
All right, motion to adjourn?
Oh, was there a receiving file?
All right, move to file by Mr. Maniscalco. Second? Second by Mr. Dingfelder. All in favor? All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you, council.
It ain't no need to go no further, man. You thought you was pretty slick, taking everybody's chick. It ain't no need to go no further, brother.